One of the defining traits of Star Trek as a franchise is that it leans toward the utopian rather than the dystopian. And one of the most noticeable ways it does this is through its depiction of advanced technology. Since the very beginning, Star Trek has shown us that technological innovation is not something to be feared, but something to be embraced. The world in which Star Trek takes place would not exist without warp drive, transporters, phasers, matter-antimatter reactors, replicators, and numerous other devices that today, over 50 years after Star Trek debuted, we can still only dream about. Technological advancement is what clears the path to the future, says Star Trek. Usually. See, that is the overriding message of the franchise, but then, every once in a while, there will be an episode or a movie or a character or a group of characters that seems to be sending the opposite message. And when I'm watching one of those episodes or movies or other things I just said, I can't help but ask myself, does Star Trek actually want us to fear technology? So, like I said, generally speaking, Star Trek's attitude toward advancing technology is quite optimistic. In many episodes of the TNG-era shows, the central crisis is solved simply by the heroes finding new creative ways to operate their technology. Geordi will reroute power to the shields at a crucial moment, or B'Elanna will release warp particles into the surrounding area to reveal a hidden escape route, or Miles will kick the thing. Okay, that's not the best example I could have picked. You get the idea. It's not always dramatically satisfying. The profusion of technobabble does tend to muffle the impact of certain episodes, but the larger message being served is clear. Technology saves the day. However, that's not always the case. Sometimes technology is presented not as a savior, but as a threat. Perhaps even an existential threat. Part of this is due, I think, not to any decision by the writers and producers of Star Trek to present a more nuanced depiction of the role of technology in our lives, but simply to the fact that Star Trek is primarily a weekly TV series, and weekly TV series need stories to tell, and technology run amok is as sturdy a sci-fi premise as there is. And, I mean, really, if you're contracted to produce between 25 and 30 hours of original TV every year, are you gonna let a philosophical commitment to positively depicting technology stop you from doing a Captain Kirk versus the evil computer story? And once you do it, are you gonna let that same philosophy stop you from doing it again? And again? And again? Hold up, that one's mine. Classic Trek's Kirk versus computer episodes are the earliest examples of Star Trek explicitly trying to elicit fear of technology from us in the audience. Those shows aren't anti-technology. After all, the heroes live on a spaceship, move from the ship to the surfaces of planets via teleportation, and use their computers constantly, but they do suggest that we should be keeping an eye on our machines, just in case. There's also the guest character of Samuel Cogley, Kirk's attorney and court-martial, whose righteous indignation in the face of advancing technology is his defining trait. And there's the recurring idea that paradise is a place without advanced technology of any kind, as seen in episodes like, This Side of Paradise, or The Paradise Syndrome. This concept reappears a few times in the TNG era, notably in the film Star Trek Insurrection, where the BHACHU are presented as having an ideal society that is apparently completely free of advanced technology or complex machinery. The heroes at the center of these episodes, Spock in This Side of Paradise, Kirk in The Paradise Syndrome, and Picard in Insurrection, all long to stay in these places without computers or replicators or transporters, but in the end, they return to life aboard their starships, and this is supposed to make us sad. At least a little bit. Not too sad, because, I mean, we don't really want them to leave their ships. That would mean they wouldn't be on the show anymore. And anyway, why the hell should they get to be happy? Hell, in the very first episode of Star Trek ever produced, the original pilot, The Cage, one of Captain Pike's fantasies, created for him by the Telosians, is to be off the Enterprise and out in the country with his horse. Granted, that's not necessarily Pike wanting to escape technology specifically. He wants to escape the burden of being in command. However, I can't help but notice that the place he longs to escape to doesn't seem to have any starships or transporters around. We also had the occasional complaint from Dr. McCoy about how he didn't trust the transporter, and when he returned to duty during Star Trek The Motion Picture, he griped to Kirk that the new sick bay was, quote, like a goddamn computer center, but these are presented more as quirks of McCoy's character, rather than take-home messages for the viewer. While classic Trek had its episodes dealing with the perils of technology, this didn't really become a prominent recurring theme in the franchise until Star Trek The Next Generation, the show which is generally regarded, rightly so I think, as the most optimistic and utopian of the bunch. Because, as bright and reassuring as TNG was, when it decided to go dark, it went all in, and there is no better example of the grimmer side of TNG or of Star Trek warning us of the potential dangers of technology than the most enduring and inimitable villains of the TNG era, the Borg. The Borg aren't just the most prominent example of Star Trek taking a bleak view of technology, they're also the least subtle. Look at them, they're literally half human, or humanoid, half machine. They're one of the most alien of all Star Trek species, and never more so than during their very first appearance in the franchise, the episode Q Who from TNG's second season. In this episode, Q catapults the Enterprise into a distant section of the galaxy to teach a lesson to Picard, who rubbed Q the wrong way with his "to boldly go where no one has gone before" bullshit. The previously confident Picard finds himself facing an enemy he doesn't understand, perhaps isn't capable of understanding, and doesn't know how to defeat. The Borg, when we first meet them, are unsettling in a few ways. First, their ship is just a big cube. No obvious weaponry or propulsion systems, no lights, no identifying marks. Worf can't detect any of the usual systems they'd expect to find on a starship. Data can't even read life signs. It's just a big-ass cube, sitting there in space, inscrutable, immovable. Second, the Borg don't operate as individuals, but as a single collective consciousness. When the Borg cube hails the Enterprise for the first time, it's not one Borg, but the combined voice of the entire cube that speaks, flatly informing Picard that his ship's defensive capabilities won't be enough to withstand them, and warning him not to resist. Third, when Riker leads an away team over to the Borg ship, the Borg they encounter don't even acknowledge them. There are intruders on their ship, and the Borg don't even care. And why should they? What are these dipshits gonna do? Guinan told you to turn around and head back like half an hour ago. Why are you still here? The Borg are such a serious threat that at the end of this episode, our heroes don't defeat them. They just barely manage to escape, thanks to Q, who takes pity on Picard after Picard admits that, okay, yes, maybe he's in a little over his head this time. The Borg represent more than just the dangers of advanced technology. For instance, their total lack of individuality is a pretty obvious counterpoint to one of the most fundamental principles cherished by Star Trek protagonists, that the rights of the individual to speak freely, to be themselves, to live free from oppression are of the utmost importance. But it's no coincidence that their lack of individuality is a direct result of the technology that has come to dominate their existence. More than any other group of characters in the franchise, the Borg represent the bleak future that awaits us if, to paraphrase Albert Einstein, our technology exceeds our humanity. They're Star Trek's version of, say, the machines in the Matrix trilogy, or Skynet in the Terminator franchise. Actually, no, they're not, because the machines in Skynet only ever managed to take over Earth, whereas the Borg control vast regions of space spanning much of an entire quadrant of the galaxy. Am I really supposed to be scared of a computer network with some remote control robots compared to that? I don't think so. Get in the game, Skynet. Please don't. The Borg are sometimes described as Star Trek's answer to zombies. That's not an entirely unfair comparison. Borg drones, like zombies, are easy to handle on their own, but can be nearly unstoppable in large numbers. Borg and zombies are both driven by a need to consume us in some way. And both the Borg and zombies present us with the horrific consequences of the loss of self. But while the loss of self of zombies is due to their mindlessness, the Borg lose their individuality for precisely the opposite reason. They are not mindless, but single-minded. They represent the fear that as technology allows us to grow more and more connected to one another, we will lose ourselves as individuals. The part will be subsumed by the whole. The fact that the Borg were introduced in 1989, when the World Wide Web didn't even exist yet, speaks to how deeply rooted this insecurity is, particularly for us Americans, who have been furiously masturbating to the thought of what rugged individualists we are for the last 250 years. When the Borg are defeated for the first time in the second part of The Best of Both Worlds, it's not more powerful weapons or more advanced technology that spells their downfall, but the re-emergence of the personality of Jean-Luc Picard, who has been assimilated by the Borg to serve as a spokesperson for why am I telling you this? You know this. It's Captain Picard who somehow manages to reach out to Data and tell him how to stop the Borg cube that is on its way to attack Earth. In Star Trek First Contact, once again, it's one of our heroes reasserting their individuality that allows the good guys to triumph. This time, it's Data, who rejects the Borg Queen's offer of companionship in order to rescue Picard and stop the Borg from assimilating the Earth of the past. Before releasing the corrosive gas that eventually kills her, he even throws "resistance is futile" back in her face because Data has emotions now, and he knows that killing alone won't satisfy him. He's got to twist the knife a little. So human. Anyway, the Borg are definitely Exhibit A for Star Trek's less than optimistic outlook on technology and its potential effect on our lives, but they're not the only example. In fact, they're not the only example to be closely associated with TNG. The Borg are an outside threat, but there's something else that routinely endangers the lives of our heroes, and it's right there on the ship. Yeah. The holodeck. I did a whole video about the holodeck a while back, so I won't get too deep into it here, but since we're talking about the times when Star Trek has explored the dark side of technology, it's at least worth mentioning that the holodeck, among the most awesome and wondrous of all Star Trek technology, is constantly suffering dangerous malfunctions and trying to murder the crew. And even when the holodeck seems to be working properly, we're shown that it has a dark side, like when we meet Lieutenant Barclay, Holo Addict, who would rather live in his chosen fantasy than face life in the real world. The holodeck and the Borg represent technology itself as a threat to us. There are other examples of this from throughout the franchise. In Voyager's Future's End two-parter, the main villain is Henry Starling, who has pilfered a time ship from the 29th century to introduce advanced technology to the 20th century before its time. In Deep Space Nine's The Quickening, Dr. Bashir is working to cure a disease on a blighted planet when he realizes the radiation from his electronic medical equipment is actually worsening his patient's symptoms. In Star Trek II, Dr. McCoy declares that the Genesis device, intended to bring life to lifeless planets, if misused, could result in universal Armageddon. And the big bad of Star Trek Discovery's second season turns out to be Control, an AI created by Starfleet to use as a threat assessment tool that eventually decides, you know what, I'm just going to kill everybody. Those rogue AIs, man. There's just no talking to them. But there's another danger related to advanced technology that Star Trek has drawn our attention to time and time again. It's not an existential threat, more of a moral one, and we get a hint of it in another great episode from TNG's second season, The Measure of a Man. This is the episode where Commander Bruce Maddox, version 1, attempts to transfer Data from the Enterprise to his robot dissection lab so he can take Data apart and figure out how to make more of him. Captain Picard challenges this transfer request, arguing that Data is not the property of Starfleet, but an individual with rights that must be respected. Picard worries that he won't be able to mount a strong enough defense, and that Data will be compelled to undergo Maddox's dangerous procedure. The turning point comes when Picard talks things over with Guinan, who ponders what it would be like should Maddox succeed in replicating Data and building an army of androids, a whole race of people to do the dirty, dangerous jobs nobody else wants to do. Expendable. Disposable. You're talking about slavery, says Picard. And Guinan's like, I think that's a little harsh. And Picard says, but that's what you meant, right? Slavery? If they can ignore Data's rights this time, they can create a whole race of other androids and ignore their rights too. Is that what you're saying? I'm not saying I'm not, but I'm not saying I am. Why are you, God, being so cryptic? Slavery! That's obviously what you mean. Maybe, maybe not. Anyway, that's totally what she means, and Picard uses it, and he wins, and Data gets to tell Maddox to go swim in some plasma coolant. Ask the Borg Queen what it's like, ya hump. It's Data's favorite way to murder. Actually, I'm wrong. Catch him on a bad day, and he'll snap your neck soon as look at you. You never know when our favorite gentle, inquisitive android will turn into a merciless killing machine. Have I wandered off topic while also remaining on topic? How's that even possible? Data may have won his personal liberty in The Measure of a Man, but the idea of people being willing to ignore the personhood of artificial intelligence when it's convenient comes up again and again in subsequent episodes. In TNG's 6th season episode, The Quality of Life, Data suspects that maintenance robots called exocomps are developing sentience and decides that it is therefore unethical to force them to risk themselves performing dangerous tasks. In Star Trek Voyager's Author from that show's 7th season, the ship's holographic doctor goes through something similar to Data's experience in The Measure of a Man, petitioning a Federation court to recognize his rights as an artist after a publisher releases his holo-novel without permission. Though the Doctor wins, his victory is extremely narrow. He is granted only the right to control the distribution of his work, not fully recognized legal personhood. And the episode ends with a scene of hundreds of holograms just like the Doctor working in a Federation mine, secretly passing around bootlegs of the Doctor's novel. So apparently that thing Guinan was afraid was going to happen with androids wound up happening with holograms. Oh! And also with androids, eventually, as we see in Season 1 of Star Trek Picard. There's been some confusion among fans as to how the synths depicted working at Starfleet facilities during flashbacks in Star Trek Picard make sense given the events of The Measure of a Man, which seemed to set a precedent that would prevent something like that from ever happening. I think the key distinction is that, unlike Data, the worker synths that we see working at Utopia Planitia are not actually sentient. They're like robots on assembly lines, only more sophisticated. And they look like people. With faces. Some folks who didn't like the Picard series treat the existence of the synths as a mistake on the part of the writers or an intentional thumbing of their noses at established canon. But I think it was a very deliberate choice by the creators of the series, and it's a choice that allows them to tell a story very much in line with The Measure of a Man, The Quality of Life, and Author. In the season finale of the Picard series, the heroes fight to prevent the coming of a powerful and malevolent form of artificial intelligence, a synthetic organism that is coming to wipe out all organic life in the galaxy in order to preserve the existence of artificial life. And while this super scary tentacled robot monster is certainly another example of Star Trek showing us a darker view of technology, the larger point of the series isn't that technology itself is a threat to us, but rather that, if we aren't careful, we can wind up using our technology as an excuse to indulge our darkest impulses. The Romulans in Star Trek Picard are so afraid of the coming AI apocalypse that they ban the development of all synthetic life within their empire and secretly manipulate the Federation to do the same thing. Then they very nearly destroy an entire colony of androids created by Bruce Maddox, version 2, and Alton Sung in order to prevent them from summoning the killer robot Sky Octopus. And the Federation is far from innocent here. Not only do they ban synths after the Romulan orchestrated attack on Utopia Planitia, that attack is only possible in the first place because Starfleet went ahead and built itself an army of disposable people anyway, skating on the technicality that they aren't cognitively sophisticated enough to qualify as sentient. Almost, but not quite violating our most cherished ideals. That's the Starfleet way. The threat to organic life posed by the metal squid from the Portal of Death is catastrophic, but the series makes it pretty clear that the androids on Coppelius only summon it because they feel their survival depends on it. Because, from their perspective, the killer super AI isn't the threat. We are. The Federation created an army of androids, and when some of those androids turned on it, the Federation responded by outlawing them, by literally making it illegal for them to exist. So what else were they supposed to do? Maybe attempting to trigger a trans-dimensional robot apocalypse was a bit much, but they had to do something to protect themselves. Like I said, this is all very much in keeping with stories having similar themes from earlier in the franchise. In The Measure of a Man, Maddox admits that his procedure to replicate data may potentially destroy him. In The Quality of Life, Dr. Farallon wipes the memories of exocomps who malfunction after attaining sentience. In the Voyager episode Latent Image, we learn that Captain Janeway has been altering the Doctor's memory without his consent to keep him from becoming preoccupied with a traumatic event that is making it difficult for him to function. The pattern is pretty clear. We create artificial intelligence, we support it as long as we can continue to exploit it, and when it becomes too inconvenient, when we can't use it anymore, we try to destroy it, or at least destroy its personhood enough to make it useful to us again. Stories like these are more compelling, I think, than ones centered on Kirk talking computers to death or the crew of the Enterprise battling a hive mind of relentless cyborgs, because they represent Star Trek not just warning us about something that could happen in the future, but challenging us to be better people right now. Episodes like The Measure of a Man and The Quality of Life and the first season of Picard aren't telling us to be afraid of what technology can do to us, but of what it could tempt us to do to ourselves. The fear isn't of being enslaved, but of becoming the kind of people who can justify enslaving others. Artificial intelligence doesn't actually exist yet, at least not at anywhere near the level of sophistication shown in Star Trek. Unfortunately, it doesn't have to, for us to know that we're capable of the kind of behavior depicted in those aforementioned episodes. We're just as willing to exploit our fellow humans, to deprive them of rights, to deny their personhood, to turn away from their oppression if it serves our own interests. Human history is filled with enslavement, inequality, injustice, all of which were allowed to exist and are still allowed to exist because some of us are willing to accept that our comfort comes at the cost of the suffering of others. That's something else, I guess, that sets Star Trek apart from other sci-fi franchises. I mentioned the Terminator and Matrix series earlier. In both of those, we see what happens when our machines rise up and attempt to destroy us. Star Trek, every once in a while, has been thoughtful enough to ask us to consider that maybe the robot uprising is justified. Or, if not justified, understandable. And not because of those evil robots, but because of us. Hey folks, hope you enjoyed this episode. I'm going to let you know what the subject of the next Regulation Trek Actually video will be in a minute, but first, I want to give shout-outs to some of my newest Patreon patrons, and they are Matthew Lorty, thank you Matthew, Bottom Dollar, thank you Bottom Dollar, Ashra, thank you Ashra, Arthur and Sharon, thank you Arthur and Sharon, Eric, thank you Eric, Bo with a Bang, thank you, Bo with a Bang. Stephen Munn, thank you, Stephen. M. Nee Sadak, thank you, M. Nee. Emily WIBLE, thank you, Emily. Mike Heron, thank you, Mike. Eddie Yantis, thank you, Eddie. Jeff CARR, thank you, Jeff. Judith Cardozo, thank you, Judith. Space Monkey 73, thank you, Space Monkey 73. Javier Paso, thank you, Javier. BALJEET BHACHU, thank you, BALJEET. And Actuarial Lurker, thank you, Actuarial Lurker. Those are my newest patrons to pledge $5 a month or more. Thank you so much to all my patrons. I could not do this without you. If you enjoy these videos and you want to help me to continue making them, please go to patreon.com/Steve Shives and become a patron for any amount. $5 a month gets you a shout out, but anything from $1 a month on up gets you access to the patron-only feed of my Patreon page, where you can submit questions for me to answer on my Ask Away live streams and vote in the polls to determine upcoming Trek Actually topics. Patreon.com/Steve Shives. Also, don't forget that in addition to making YouTube videos, I also co-host a pair of podcasts alongside the great Jason Harding as a part of the Lemmy Listen family of podcasts. Jason and I co-host Late Seating, a movie review podcast, and also, of particular relevance to you as a viewer of this video, I should think, we co-host a Star Trek-themed comedy podcast titled The Ensign's Log. We're well into our 3rd season, having a blast, so please, if you haven't checked it out yet, and you dig the Star Trek stuff I do, give a listen to the Ensign's Log. Links are in the description. Okay, my friends, we've waited for this a long time, and the day has finally arrived. The topic of the next Regulation Trek Actually video is one that was a mainstay in the Patreon poll for many months last year. It was a runner-up several times, but could never quite pull out the victory. Until now, that is. The winner of the most recent poll and the subject of September's video is... Did Captain Janeway actually murder Tuvix? The people have spoken, and their voice will be heard. And that's coming up in a few weeks. I've got another comment response video to do before that. Maybe another not actually video in addition to that one. Who knows? I haven't decided. We'll see. Anyway, thanks for watching, everybody. Take care.